What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another weather forecast here by Agent Weather Forecast, and hope you guys are all enjoying your wonderful Friday this afternoon here. And in this video, we're going to be talking about the tropics once again here because there's really not much severe weather-wise or not any tropical disturbance at the moment here in the Atlantic. So we're going to be looking at a long-range forecast for at least the next 2 weeks here, discussing whether we have any opportunities for storms to develop across maybe the Western Caribbean or maybe even portions of the Central Atlantic. So we're going to be looking at specific areas and specific time frames to see whether systems can maybe develop depending on the conditions here. And that's exactly what will be going on throughout the whole video here. Conditions like moisture, shear, looking at SAL, the dust there, and overall the amount of vorticity, just all that to show you guys whether we have an opportunity to have our letter B here before mid-June or maybe even before July here. But before we get in the video, be sure to subscribe to the channel. I would greatly appreciate it, guys. I'm trying to get to 6,000 subscribers by the end of my summer, which will be August. As well, I would recommend smashing that bell icon so you can get notified as soon as I post a video, specifically if you like tropics. And if you really enjoy the videos like these, please smash that like button so we can recommend this to other people. But before we get into the video, I want to give a big shout out to David Schlotthauer, guys. The link will be in the description below. He does awesome weather forecasts just like me, mainly typically daily forecasts on tropics, severe weather, long range, you name it, he does. And as well, he'll be covering the tropics just like me. So if you want to get double coverage on tropics, especially if you live on the eastern coast of the United States, I recommend subscribing to him. But let's go ahead and get in the video. So guys, first thing we want to look at right now is the SATs across much of the North Atlantic to see overall where we have our best waters in the whole region, so we can get a better look at if a storm or a low pressure does develop there, is it actually favorable to sustain this storm or keep it going to strengthen here. And we do have a lot of areas to watch out for favorable conditions for at least the next few weeks here, specifically the Western Caribbean. They're getting almost 30 degrees Celsius down there between the Yucatan Peninsula and Cuba. And I've been mentioning this for the past few days that I think before mid-June, maybe June 20th, we could possibly have a storm develop here before that time frame, because we are not only seeing a ton of moisture and a ton of area wise without shear, but we're also seeing really warm ocean heat content up to a medium, and as well overall really warm waters. So I think we have to watch out for the Western Caribbean for the next few weeks here before July, because I think overall they have a really good chance to possibly be the habitat of a low pressure that can very well become tropical before June 20th. And as you guys have seen, GFS has been showing a few storms or low pressure develop in that region. So I think even the global models are considering the conditions right now. But looking really good for the Western Caribbean. As well, the MDR is warming up quite significantly, specifically the southern portion. The thing is, there's a ton of shear right now as a result of this strong trade winds, so we are starting to see a lot of dust and shear across that region, but still really warm waters, specifically down there just outside there south of Sierra Leone. We do have, I believe, 28.5, 29, kind of right in that area. So overall, still pretty warm waters and slightly above average, and overall pretty warm North Atlantic. Let's go ahead and look at the temperature anomaly. We're seeing overall a pretty warm Atlantic, specifically there across the Northwest Atlantic, but we do, like I did say, really warm waters there for the Western Caribbean and Gulf of Mexico. So this is my main area to watch out. As well, I am keeping a close eye on whether we can have some storms all the way out here. I know that's typically not an area for June, but it's looking pretty good moisture wise. The shears mainly between these areas, at least for the next few days. That's going to be the main area. The most unfavorable area is going to be between these two black lines. But right here in the edge is where we have those really warm waters. And that's exactly where we'll be seeing really good favorable conditions, including moisture, shear, all that. It's just going to be pretty good. I mean, all that shear is going to be kind of maintained towards the central Atlantic. However, the only thing is if that Bermuda high does continue to strengthen, we could see an expanding region, a really warm area, which I'll be talking about later in the video. But let's go ahead and look at future models, including the GFS MSLP. So let's go ahead and look now at the MSLP right now. Actually, I just changed my webcam. Hope that didn't scare you guys or whatever. But we're looking at the MSLP here in the GFS here, and we're looking at every 3 hours here, the 3-hour thickness here on the GFS. So as of now, obviously, we're not looking at anything for the next 5 days or so. I mean, we do have a few storms here across the MDR, some some subtropical storms down there and the equatorial Atlantic. But like I did say, a ton of shear is going to be preventing these storms from becoming tropical or whatever. And that's what we do have that strong, pretty strong Bermuda high, 1,031 millibars right there. And it's going to bring in a huge, large area of very, very dry atmosphere here. So we're not expecting any favorable conditions right now for the northeast or north central Atlantic at the moment here because of that very strong Bermuda high. And actually that will as well prevent some storms even in the MDR, at least for this week here. But the most favorable conditions for seeing storms this week, and I don't necessarily mean tropical storms, but I mean just storms in general, will be for much of the western and northwestern Atlantic there outside of that strong Bermuda high there, because we're going to be seeing a really large area of dry air, and you'll be seeing that in relative humidity later in the video. But it's going to continue throughout the week here. Like I did say, the main area I'm really watching out for will be the Western Caribbean. However, we do have some areas that can possibly have some type of vorticity off the coast of Africa there right in the next 135 hours. By next Thursday, we do have a small storm there with a ton of moisture, where we do have some type of vorticity there, the rotation in the higher atmosphere here. So we're going to keep a close eye on that. Obviously, like I did say, there is some shear there and dry Saharan dust. So it's going to really be a limiting factor. But we're not really watching out for specific regions. Like I'm not watching out for a specific area except for the Western Caribbean. I think we all know that's the most favorable area at the moment right now in the Atlantic. But overall, I think once we get towards around the mid-June time frame, that's where we actually may have to watch out for a storm here. I mean, the GFS has been quite consistent for having low pressure develop, and as well, they've been showing a storm or so. And we do have a low pressure by June 12th right here. There you see that kind of, those isobars kind of wrapping around. That's where we're seeing the signaling of some pretty strong winds here. It doesn't mean 30 miles an hour or 39 miles an hour, which is what we need for a storm, but it does mean there is some possibly rotation within that low pressure. And we do have some pretty heavy rain, and you do see we have some very, very small areas of vorticity. And it's exactly in the region we're watching out for, just outside the Caribbean as well. Another low pressure the same day, June 12th, right here in the northwest Atlantic. And as you do see, the Bermuda high does weaken a little bit, so it's going to kind of limit the amount of dry dust and dry atmosphere towards the northeast Atlantic. So all this is possible as long as this Bermuda high does stay towards the east and weakens like it's expected to. But again, we're still pretty far out from this time frame, but we're looking at a little bit of the western Atlantic here. We do have a low pressure off the Carolinas as well, watching out for the Caribbean. And even look at this, we have something very interesting by June 14th here in the MDR. So like I did say, shear is going to be a big factor, and there's going to be a lot of dry, pretty dry atmosphere for the next 10 days or at least maybe the next 7 days for the MDR. But we will see a time frame after the next 10 days, a very small time frame of some moisture coming off Africa. And this can very well be interesting. I mean, it takes a very small time frame to have something develop, especially if it's a very small, low pressure and small disturbance. It can take advantage of a small area and small time frame of no shear and moisture. So we have to keep a close eye on possibly, I'd say definitely the Western Caribbean and the Caribbean in general, possibly as well watching out for here just outside of Bermuda, and maybe a small time frame to watch out for the MDR. And I think once we get past June 10th is when things will start going down here. When I mean going down, I mean maybe disturbances, maybe closer out to see storms possibly develop. But like I did say, at least for the next 5 days, there will be nothing to watch out for. I mean, we have a very strong high pressure bringing in a lot of dry air. We have a ton of shear across the central Atlantic. There's just really no air to watch out for the next 5 days. But like I did say, like you just saw right now, there are some storms like the Caribbean, MDR, and even Northwest Atlantic where there are some areas of vorticity and as well as low pressures. Let's not go ahead and look at the vorticity forecast here for the next 10 days here on the GFS. So obviously, like I did say, we're not watching out for anything anytime soon here. But vorticity is basically the amount of rotation, or it's actually seen basically measuring, in a way, the amount of rotation in the higher atmosphere. And actually in the atmosphere in general. Here we're looking at 500 millibars. So we're watching kind of in that middle portion there of the atmosphere. Obviously, 925s are on the surface, and then around 250 is way up there in the atmosphere. So we're kind of right in that central portion there of the atmosphere. And something you want to see to look out for tropical systems is really dark reds or possibly even purples, because that's signaling a very, very tight signal of rotation. I mean, you see those greens and light blues. That's very, very weak rotation. Even grays, there's basically no rotation at all. But right here, that's going to be something you want to look out for. Like when we look for a specific area with favorable conditions and we have a disturbance, that's something you really want to look out for. Like that spiraling in that dark purple, dark red in the middle is exactly what you want to watch out for. Obviously, there's going to be some time or some cases where it's just a big red dot and no spiraling. As long as you see a circle area of really tight rotation, that's something you want to keep a close eye on. And just because there's vorticity does not mean there's going to be a storm or a hurricane. It just means there's rotation in the atmosphere. Obviously, we have a ton of areas of vorticity in the United States right now. Doesn't mean there's going to be a tropical storm in Kansas. I mean, it just depends on the condition-wise how favorable it is. For example, by the next 63 hours and almost 3 days, we do have a pretty impressive amount of vorticity there outside of the islands outside of Africa. I think I'm not 100% sure of the name. I think it's Cape Verde Islands. I'm not 100% sure. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the Cape Verde Islands right there off Africa is where we'll be watching out for some type of vorticity by early next week here on Monday. Obviously, we don't have disturbance out there. You're probably wondering why is there no disturbance for a pretty good looking vorticity signal? Because obviously there's no favorable conditions. There is going to be some moisture, but there's going to be a ton of shear. I mean, a ton of shear. We're talking over 40 knots. So obviously this, although we still have vorticity, there's not going to be a low pressure that's going to become tropical. I mean, we do still have those spiraling isobars and rotation, and you see that vorticity is pretty darn tight, but there's just not the conditions to allow that to happen. If there were very little shear, we're talking maybe some tropical storm up there, but it's just not too good. As we now go towards June 10th, June 11th, as well, watching out for maybe a big signal of vorticity here in the central Atlantic there outside the MDR. That's something to keep a close eye on. But again, there's just really a big limit to what we're watching out for the next 10 days because of all that shear. The best areas of no shear right now, or not right now, but for at least the next 2 weeks, is Western Caribbean, and as well for portions of the Northwest Atlantic, at least in my opinion there. So that's exactly where I'm watching out personally. But we do have a small little dot of vorticity here by June 10th and June 11th here. And as well, even by almost June 12th, we do have a pretty big dot of vorticity out here in the Northeast Atlantic. And that's still something to keep a close eye on, because by that time, the shear should definitely die off a little bit, and the Bermuda high should weaken a little bit as well. So we're not seeing that strong influence of beautiful skies and dry air. We can very well see an opportunity for tropical thunderstorms to develop. But the main thing to watch out for is what the GFS is showing here later by mid-June, a pretty big signal of tropical activity outside of the Carolinas. We are watching out maybe for a big signal of vorticity there, and this is definitely a big question mark. Can this actually happen? Although it's still pretty far out, there is confidence that there will be a storm within this whole area. I mean, the GFS has been consistent for at least the past maybe 7 days that there's going to be a storm within the circle. I mean, obviously, it first started off with going to the Gulf of Mexico, then it went toward Florida, and then it went out to sea, and now it's the Carolinas. So although the location's bipolar right now, location in general, like southeast coast United States, Western Caribbean, and timing is pretty consistent though. But the exact area of landfall is still pretty out there. And obviously, this is basically a week. This is actually almost 2 weeks out. So something to keep a close eye on though, because this is for sure in a favorable atmosphere, and I will show you in a second the moisture, shear, and all that. And we saw the waters, the Gulf Stream is bringing in above average waters for this area, almost 28 degrees Celsius already out of the Carolinas because of the Gulf Stream. Thank you to the Gulf Stream for the favorable conditions of the East Coast right now. And so really watching out for that. But overall, Even by June 20th, some areas of vorticity in the Gulf of Mexico. So we have a lot to watch out for. There's gonna be a lot within the next 2 weeks. There's gonna be a lot of opportunities for storms to develop. I'm really watching out though for the Western Atlantic, whether it's the Carolinas, whether it's the Caribbean. But there's still an opportunity or two for a storm maybe to sneak in, or a disturbance to sneak in the Central Atlantic. But obviously, there's still a lot of uncertainty. Let's now go ahead and look here at now the precipitated water anomaly here. And right now, like I did say, there's going to be a lot of dry atmosphere right now across much of the Central Atlantic. Here you see that's because of that Bermuda High, bringing very dry atmosphere, very hot, clear skies, but just very dry. You're not going to be seeing any storms forming near the Bermuda High there. But let's now go ahead and look here by next week here, which will be the main time frame to watch out for. Let's now go towards around June 8th. We start to see a pretty big moisture wave here across the southern Caribbean and just outside of the western MDR. And this will be the moisture wave that can possibly allow for storms to develop here near the western Atlantic here by June 13th, which is where we'll be watching out for possibly the Caribbean. And just outside the Caribbean, we have a big area of moisture between the Yucatan Peninsula near Jamaica and as well all the way up near Bermuda. So this is a big blob of a ton of moisture for a pretty long time frame. June 13th there, June 14th, June 15th, and even June 16th. But the GFS does show that storm near June 17th, and you do see we do have a ton of moisture there. However, there could possibly be some moisture or some dry air sneaking in from that high pressure there. So we may see a pretty lopsided storm if it were to happen. But like I did mention earlier in the video, the dry air won't always be there off Africa. I mean, as we go towards after June 10th, we're going to start seeing a pretty big moisture wave off Africa into the MDR. So that can possibly allow the opportunity for maybe a system or so, maybe low pressure, to possibly become something. Like I say the word possibly a lot because it's really uncertain. There's a chance it can happen. There's a chance it cannot happen. It's just really, it's a big question whether it can happen or not. But overall, conditions will start to clear up for the southern MDR by the next week or so. So there's a chance for maybe a low pressure to just sneak in, and the story will tell after that. But overall, I mean, right now this week, nothing at all. What's today? Today's Friday, so Friday, Saturday, nothing. The beginning of next week doesn't look like anything. But once we get past June 10th, things will get interesting here. Let's now go ahead and look at the relative humidity. Like I did say, really dry right now off Africa. Thank you to the Saharan dust, and there you see right there, pretty overall dry near the Bermuda High, seeing maybe 30%, 40%, maybe only 50% humidity there. So overall, there's two big areas of low humidity there, and that's going to continue because of that high pressure. But as we now go to June 10th, June 11th, that's what we'll be watching out there for maybe the beginning of the Caribbean moisture wave. And by June 13th, seeing some areas there anywhere from 65 to possibly nearly 90% humidity. But the Eastern Atlantic will continue to become very unfavorable, and that's why you saw that big vorticity storm there in the next 3 days in the Northeast Atlantic, which I said won't happen. It's because of how dry the atmosphere is. Let me go ahead and show you guys. So that's around 60, 70 hours out. Look at that, 60, 75 hours. Very, very dry. And if it were to form, it would be very, very lopsided, and it'd just be destroyed by shear and by the dry air, because we have one portion there where maybe 85% humidity, but if it's to go east a little bit more, it's going through possibly 30%, 20% humidity. So it's not looking too good there at all off Africa. But as we go towards June, maybe past June 10th, it's going to get a lot better right here. Going to get nearly almost 90% humidity. So it'll start to clear up with the MDR, which is why I do think the MDR can very well be something to keep a close eye on for the end of June and much of July. But I mean, it's looking pretty good overall humidity wise, because obviously that Bermuda High is keeping that obviously drier to the Northeast Atlantic and as well MDR. But the Caribbean, specifically the Northeast Atlantic is looking, or Northwest Atlantic, sorry, is looking pretty good. So that's why I think there may be an opportunity for something to develop here. I think there's an opportunity for the next 2 weeks or so, because we have a ton of moisture there, almost at least a 5-day time period of 100% humidity for a specific area. And that's exactly why that Carolina system can possibly be something to keep a close eye on, location wise and strength wise. And then, almost last but not least, this is going to be the second thing before we end the video, is the shear here. So, like I did say, there's going to be a ton of shear here coming from the West Atlantic. That's going to bring a ton of dry air there across Africa, and as well a ton of dry or a ton of shear surrounding that high, Bermuda high right there. So the reasoning why it's so unfavorable for that 3 day vorticity out in the GFS. Let's go ahead and look at that 3 days out. There's a ton of shear there. So there's the low pressure, but I mean, if it were to maybe be already a hurricane, then we're talking maybe something. But since it's not even formed yet, it's going to be very unbearable for this to develop, because we still have 50 knot shear, 40 knot shear there. So it's still very, very unfavorable to have something formed there. But I mean, Central Atlantic MDR not looking good right now. But once you get to around June 12th, June 13th, there's very, very little shear across the Western Caribbean and across the Western Atlantic. So there's definitely an opportunity there to watch out for the next 2 weeks. And it's going to be something to keep a very, very close eye out for that. And then last but not least, let's go ahead and look at the SAL, or Saharan dust, for Africa. So obviously right now there is a ton of dust off Africa. Here you see the lighter that color gets, kind of the thicker that dust is. And we do see very thick amounts of dust there off Africa. Thank you to all that shear. And that's going all the way up to portions there of the MDR, but definitely not as severe as that SAL outbreak last year. As we go now towards the next 3 days, it's going to continue to expand that dust now. So it's going to become a lot more severe now, expanding a lot more as that shear continues to go hover over the same areas. And that's why that system we're looking at 3 days, that vorticity area right there, it really won't form, because there's going to be some pretty thick amount of SAL there. And you can kind of see we're getting those pinks and almost even whites in that same area. So it's definitely not going to form. And we may even get some dust near the Virgin Islands and Lesser Antilles. So we will start to see this dust become a lot more severe as we go into mid next week here. But once we start going now into the 14th, it will start to calm down. That dust, you can kind of see it. There's a ton of whites by the 10th and 11th. But once we go down to the 13th and 14th, it will start to calm down. It's still going to go out to sea, but the colors will kind of become less severe here. So there will be a little bit dust maybe for the Western Caribbean for that time frame we're watching out for. So it's still very uncommon. But hope you guys enjoyed the video, and see you guys later.